Are we good? Good morning. This is the press conference that I have before a legislative meeting, our regular legislative meetings, and we have a legislative meeting tomorrow, June 3rd. We will start with the committee of the whole meeting at 11 o'clock, followed by the legislative meeting itself. It's the regular legislative meeting for the month of June. We have a schedule. We will have a June 17th will be committee of the whole and possibly an additional legislative meeting. July 1st will be a legislative meeting. The council will vote on the budget on July 14th and again on July 28th. And I've asked members to hold July 31st in case we need some extra time to work on the Budget Support Act. So that's the schedule of the council meetings between now and August. That means that we will have to make some changes to our recess rules since the council every year for 50 years has gone on recess on July 15th. But the mayor's late submission of the budget requires us to be working until August on the budget. The committees will be marking up on June 23rd, 24th, and 25th. The committee of the whole will have a hearing on all the budget measures. We call this the official hearing on June 18th. So, as you know, we received the budget 2 months late last Tuesday. I believe that was May 27th. And so we are moving very quickly to go through the public hearing process. I do feel that it's been very unfair to the public that the way the delay in the budget has made it much more difficult for the public to participate in the process than is usually the case. Our timeline is always short under the Home Rule Act, 70 days maximum, and so it's always a challenge for everybody to understand the budget and to be able to comment, but it's even more so this year. With regard to the Committee of the Whole tomorrow, there's a bill that's coming out of the Committee on Health, Farmers Market Support Amendment Act, and there are 4 bills being marked up by the Committee of the Whole. One of them is review of agency action clarification, which has to do with the Supreme Court decision last year that eliminated agency deference as a standard in judicial review, and to act proactively that does not happen here in the district. We have this legislation. We also have very comprehensive legislation coming before the Committee of the Whole tomorrow, Vacant to Vibrant Amendment Act, that comprehensively amends our vacant property law to try to catch vacant properties before they become vacant for a long period of time. I'm thinking, for example, properties sometimes become vacant because they get tied up in probate. That's one of the issues that the legislation addresses. Just anything you can think of with regard to vacant property, this legislation seeks to address. The committee staff has been working on this legislation for a couple of years with a working group involving many different agencies as well as community stakeholders. And there's a bill that would officially name what everyone knows as MacArthur High School to officially name it John Thompson Junior High School. I think you all have copies of the agenda, so I'm not going to go through everything in the agenda. Just to look quickly, the emergency bills, which usually get more attention than other legislative measures, the Family Rehousing Stabilization Program, I believe is continuing legislation that's already been law for a while. The Pilot Truancy Reduction Emergency, which is a pilot program that we set up a year ago, needs to be renewed. It's 5 schools are where there are truant students being referred to Department of Human Services rather than to the Court Social Services Agency. The Rental housing registration extension and the District of Columbia Housing Authority stabilization, those are re-upping the emergencies that were adopted last year. And the tipped minimum wage increase clarification would postpone the next scheduled increase in the tipped minimum wage. I think it postpones it to October. And that's to allow time for the council to work through this issue, which the mayor put in her proposed Budget Support Act. I've already talked about the budget schedule. I suspect there are going to be some questions about the budget or the Budget Support Act. So rather than me second guessing before you ask the questions, I'll let you ask the questions, if there are any. Martin. And I apologize for our cramped space here, but with the budget hearings, all the rooms are being taken, and they don't make accommodations for the chairman or the press. So here we are.
Just to start off where you started, which is the budget and the timing. So July 14th, I did a very rough count. That's roughly 50 days from when you got the budget to when you first had the vote. That's 20 days less than you could give yourself.
No, because we have to vote twice. And the second vote has to be within 70 days. Yes. So that's like 6 days early. Yes, please don't alarm the budget director. Is that it for questions?
No, I wanted to ask about now the mayor's proposed scrapping plans to publicly financing the jail, instead have the public sector develop it and then lease it back to the district on a long-term basis. I'm curious what you make of that plan.
I'm going to characterize it as a plan more in concept than having been fully fleshed out. I'm very concerned and disappointed with that proposal. There's no question in my mind that this is one of the capital projects that is being expended to accommodate for the RFK Stadium. We desperately need a new jail for a couple of reasons. One is that the jail buildings are old and some would say dilapidated. That might be overstating it, but they are not as good as they should be to house human beings. And in addition, the architecture with regard to jails has changed so much in the last few decades, so that a modern jail would be operationally much less expensive to operate. So from the standpoint of decency and the standpoint of cost, we should get a new jail as quickly as possible, and we know it will cost hundreds of millions of dollars. It was actually a significant achievement that the mayor put this in the budget a year ago, and for her to take a 180-degree turn on this is very concerning. And as I said, I don't think the plan for doing a P3, which incidentally, there have been a number of unsolicited P3 proposals over the years for the jail, and every one of them have been ignored, but now this is proclaimed to be the way to go. So we'll see. That is part of the budget process, is to better understand what the executive intends and whether it is acceptable to the council. Yes, Jenny.
Part of the administration's justification for that move was they said that the cost had been moved to $1 million, and that they said was unreasonable to sort of kind of the traditional capital budget process. Do you think that that point has credence, or do you think that a project that expensive could still meet the capital budget? And then I guess I'll add, do you think that cost projection is reasonable to you?
Over $1 billion sounds high. I think it's easy to throw out a figure that isn't necessarily a solid, vetted, carefully developed figure. I'm inclined to say that the work on the cost has not been done, because for several months, um, I'm speculating, but for several months, the priority has been to shift capital dollars to be able to fund the stadium. And so the work to control the cost has not been done.
The mayor's office has been pretty adamant that this is not a move to shift money to stadium development. They say that they would have enough money for the stadium before without the JLB financed by UCD. Is that true, or are they just saving face?
Oh, gosh. How do I answer that question? I think the rhetoric that we're hearing is to be expected.
Chairman, question about RFK.
Yes.
To your knowledge, what's the current state of the CBA negotiations? I'm hearing from,
CBA, Community Benefits Agreement?
yes, sir.
I don't know.
But as far as the outcome, what commitment are you willing to make to workers that they can be guaranteed high-wage jobs, or what they call good-paying jobs?
In my view, it's all part of the mix for discussions.
So as far as your take on that, where do you stand on that as far as just ensuring that you and your council colleagues can ensure that the workers are included in the CBA to make sure that they're getting high-wage jobs?
Yeah, I heard you, and as I said, that's part of the mix. So maybe I should say a little bit more. As you know or may know, the mayor announced about a month ago the deal with the commanders. However, the council received nothing until last Tuesday. So what we have is what you've seen, which is in the Budget Support Act. And in the 3 business days that we've had since all this was given to the council, we're working our way through to understand. I am seeking to bring on board a consultant to help the council with regard to the RFK proposal, to fully understand not only what the proposal is, what's lacking in the proposal, and how it compares with other cities. What the total range of costs are, both in direct subsidy as well as benefits, which would not be a subsidy, but benefits to the team. I have indicated to the commanders that I am anxious to carry through with discussions with them as quickly as is possible, which is difficult because we're dealing full-time with a budget. And so my answer to your question with regard to, for example, benefits for workers, it's in the mix.
Can you say who that can you say who that consultant is?
No,
Is that
because we
normal?
haven't selected yet.
Is that like a normal procedure for the council to hire somebody like
It's
that?
the same process we followed with Audi Field. Dorothy.
I have a couple of questions. On the consent agenda for tomorrow, you have 3 nominees to the UDC board. I wanted to ask you about one of the gentlemen, Mr. Dannenberg. He is being appointed to the UDC board, but he seems to reside in Massachusetts. What is the story behind that one?
That is inaccurate. He's a resident of the district.
If he's a resident of the district, why does he have a full-time job with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts?
We discussed this. We discussed this at his confirmation hearing, and he teleworks, does some commuting.
Okay. The other question I had has to do with the Open Meetings Clarification Amendment Act of 2025. When you had a hearing on the matter, you alluded to concerns about ongoing negotiations regarding the Barcade Stadium, as well as the secret discussions in the other having about the budget. In essence, you were suggesting that the open door was closed to the District of Columbia regarding information on those 2 things. Do you still think there's a need for the Open Meetings Clarification Amendment Act, especially since a number of civic leaders and community groups are so opposed to it?
First, let me say that I don't agree with your characterizations of what I had said previously. To answer your question, I absolutely think that legislation is necessary.
Okay, let me go back then. It was my recollection at the hearing, you made reference to the need for the council to meet with the mayor to discuss such matters as the budget, such matters as RFK and others. Now that we're substantially past both of those issues, do you still think there's a need for an alteration in the Open Meetings Act? And the Open Meetings Act amendment that you want to make would close the door to citizens being able to get information on such things as RFK and the budget. Something that you were previously complaining about the council being closed out as regards those two matters. So why do you think there's still a need at the present time to move with such a substantial amendment to the Open Meetings Act?
Well, there were two parts to your question. With regard to the second part was the public not being able to get documents. That's not.
I didn't say go documents, Mr. Chairman. Get information.
Fine. With regard to that, the public will still be able to get information with regard to, for example, RFK or the budget or whatever. Do I still think that legislation is necessary? Absolutely. The members have to, from time to time, be able to talk informally, and also to be able to do it more easily or more spontaneously than the law allows. And members need to be able to have candid conversations, which they've not been able to have with the mayor.
Mr. Chairman.
We can go back and forth on this, but let me turn to somebody else. You had your hand up.
Chairman, what do you make of the mayor's decision to try to repeal the Sanctuary Values Amendment Act in the budget?
I think that if this is important to the mayor, she should have introduced it as freestanding legislation. That's a short answer.
Some of your colleagues said that all the legislative stuff that doesn't have any fiscal impact, they're thinking of just scrapping it all together. Your thoughts?
That's generally been what I have tried to do with the Budget Support Act. The pressure on us to be able to adopt the Budget Support Act timely is greater this year than in past years. I mean, think of it. Our fiscal year starts October 1st. Ordinarily, we get the budget. In fact, we were scheduled to get the budget on April 2nd. We would have had final reading this week or next week, which is, help me here, June, July, August, September, 4 months before the start of the fiscal year. At this point, we are scheduled to vote on the budget and the Budget Support Act the last days of July, which is 2 months before the start of the fiscal year. We don't have the time that we've had in the past to deal with non-budget issues in the Budget Support Act. Now, I've always been very careful. It's not such a hard and fast rule that a non-budget issue that is simple, easy to understand, not complicated, that those will always be excluded. But something like sanctuary values is clearly a controversial issue. And what I mean by that is that I think if I asked members today for a show of hands, how many of you are, I'm going to spike the question, how many of you are enthusiastic about repealing this? I wouldn't get any hands. So it's too soon for me to say, it's too soon for me to predict what will happen, but the mayor should have sent that as a freestanding bill. And she could have sent it as a freestanding bill not last week, but a month ago. And I will add, I can't help but feel that it's tucked into a 300-page Budget Support Act in the hopes that nobody will notice. Alex.
On the jail, the administration has said they've received unsolicited proposals for it. At
No, no.
So you
My
have-
understanding is that several years ago, several unsolicited proposals were submitted and ignored. And I believe that there was at least one unsolicited proposal that was submitted a couple months ago, not submitted to the council. And interestingly, that's contrary to what the law says, which is that unsolicited proposals are supposed to provoke a solicitation process. The administration has just chosen to ignore that.
And on I-82, since we haven't talked about it yet, I know that some of
I'm
the,
happy if we don't talk.
some of the rationale in the bill that was introduced was, wanting to wait for the budget process to play out, to give restaurants clarity. Last we talked about it, you said you didn't think the council would end up repealing 82, so what's the rationale behind pursuing the pause?
The rationale behind pursuing the pause, that's the emergency bill tomorrow, is to give some time, because I believe the new wages are supposed to, the higher wages are supposed to go into effect on July 1st, and to just give some time to work through all this. At this point, I don't know where the votes are with regard to the repeal. And frankly, I think that there are probably going to be some discussions about some sort of a compromise. Do not ask me what that is, because I'm not in the center of this. I've said consistently that I'm going to see where members are. I'm going to see where members are closer to when we vote, not today or tomorrow. But the rationale for the emergency would be to just give some time to see where we end up on July 14th.
So you expect that the pause will pass tomorrow?
Well, it depends upon who I talk to. So I know there's some members who don't support it, and they say that it will not pass. And I know there's some members who would like to see the pause, and they say that the votes are there to pass. I think I had said on Kojo a couple of weeks ago I wasn't whipping people on this. Lindsay pointed out to me that maybe the better terminology is whipping votes. Anyone who's not spoken, yes. I think we're in the second round here. Lindsay, are you okay? Whipping votes.
Two questions. If you wouldn't mind just taking me down memory lane, with 1333 Penn Street Southeast, just wanted to get a sense of what apprehensions, if any, that you have about that tax abatement.
The district government likes economic development because economic development not only means jobs, but it also means tax revenue, whether we're talking about income tax or sales tax or real property tax. In the case of this development, the proposal is to abate the real property taxes on 3 phases, all 3 phases of development. And if I remember correctly, the total cost over the life of the abatement is about $60 million that the city would not be receiving in real property tax revenue. That's a lot of revenue. We have a process called a tax abatement financial analysis, or TAFA, that has to be requested from the chief financial officer. The TAFA looks at a but-for analysis. But for the tax abatement, will this development take place? The TAFA said that it is reasonable for the abatement for phase 1, but not the other 2 phases.
Has there been any compromise between the last legislative meeting and this upcoming meeting?
The honest answer is that there hasn't been very much discussion.
Got it. And as far as, forgive me, the renaming of MacArthur High School, to your knowledge, what was that process like this time around? The degree to which the community was involved?
My understanding is the community was very much involved. We had a hearing, and there was only support. I don't recall that there was any opposition. So I'll say only support. We had a hearing a year or 2 earlier on the proposal for MacArthur, and there was opposition. And I think a fair way of characterizing it was that MacArthur was a name that was sort of given to the school rather than the school choosing it. And when I say school, I mean the community, students, or parents. So we put a pause on MacArthur, and there was a robust community process, and they came up with John Thompson.
So that process is to your liking, as far as, it's to your liking.
Well, I don't know if I like, it was acceptable. Let me add this. I think that when we name a school, it ought to be a name that has some significance, whether it's someone in the history of the school, like Jackson Reed, or, gosh, if I try to come up with examples, I won't do it on the fly, but of significance to the city, Brent comes to mind. That may not be the best choice, but Brent was a mayor a long, long time ago. Or of significance to the country, like Jefferson High School, or Jefferson Middle School, rather. And John Thompson definitely was an important figure in the city for several decades. And as I said, was selected by the school community, and we had a public hearing, and there was no objection. We are on second round. Jenny?
Yeah, thank you. I have a few questions. Just to follow up on this insurance fee status, I know you don't like the way that the mayor is proposing to use it for the extent, but if the policy were to come up, repealing the policy would come up in the format for like a standalone bill, would you support repealing it, or would you support keeping it?
Probably not, but I would probably not support it, but
Not support repealing it.
correct.
The Trump administration put out at the end of last week a list of what it categorizes as sanctuary cities and DTCs on it. Do you have any sense of what the consequences might be for DC of being sort of based on what that's
I do not have a sense of what the consequences are. I'll say more about that in a second. What's your other question?
my other questions are about our kids.
Oh. Well, let me say this first. We often talk about when I say we, I mean elected officials in the city, in the Wilson building, talk about DC values. I think that where we are with regard to undocumented residents and non-citizen residents is a place that we consider to be a DC value. I'm also aware that there have been a number of lawsuits filed against the federal government for its effort through administrative actions, whether it has to do with grants or, I don't know if they're grants, pass-through dollars. I'm thinking in the area of like education, to try to require more than what the law. Lawsuits against the federal government for trying to require more than what the law requires, and that those lawsuits have generally been successful. So where we are with regard to working with immigration authorities is that if they have a lawful judicial order, then we will, of course, cooperate. And I think that's a completely defensible position. If they have a lawful judicial order, we will cooperate. Jenny?
If it's all
What are your thoughts about the Rental Act? Specifically a provision that, from my understanding, would allow the mayor to have a way with public land. I'm only asking because
You have to remind me what her way is with public land.
understood. So that provision of the Rental Act pretty much, from my understanding, would allow the mayor to, from what I was told, it would dictate back to you on that, but my understanding is that it would give the mayor more control of how land is, parceled out. Matter of fact, I'll get that.
Okay, you're making me think of provisions in other bills, but not the Rental Act. But let me say this, I don't understand why the Rental Act is included in the Budget Support Act. The Rental Act is a bill that, just to remind everybody, the mayor had a press conference in February, did not introduce the bill for another month, but that bill is pending in the council. That is the way the legislative process should work. So there's a hearing on those proposals, followed by a committee report and committee markup, so that there's a legislative history and any one of you can understand the committee's reasoning, which typically the council will agree with, so you understand the legislative intent. Putting something like this in the Budget Support Act thwarts that legislative process. But the Rental Act just had a hearing last week. And I will talk with Councilmember White again, but my understanding is that he wants to see if some of the he wants to get some of the issues that are in the Rental Act before the council before August. So we are moving. So why it would have been put in the Budget Support Act does not make sense. Jenny, you had more on your list.
Sorry. So on RFK, I know you mentioned bringing on a consultant. Sam asked the mayor a question about this last week about what are the inputs to the revenue projections, right? Like the underlying analysis that informs them saying this is going to bring in X amount of tax dollars to the city. Have you seen that analysis? And if so, what do you think?
I'm going to answer it this way. Shortly after a couple of weeks ago, I sat down with the commander's leadership and asked a number of questions of them to better understand the deal, and asked for documents or analyses, and they have been very responsive. One proposal that they, yes, very responsive. One proposal that, one request that they do not have is the CSL study, which I think gets to the economic or the revenue projections you're asking about. So we've asked the mayor for that. She has not been responsive.
When you say not responsive,
We don't have it.
but you know such a document exists?
Yeah. What?
But you know such a document exists?
Yes. Yes, if you look at the PowerPoint from her press conference, a lot of the graphs are footnoted CSL study. But they've not shared that with us, which I find vexing. Because, as you know, the mayor wants the council to act quickly, but she's not sharing information. Of course not. As in, we've asked and we've not received. But I will say that our budget office, the council's budget office, will be doing an economic analysis. Now, it's a little different than your question, which is, have we seen the revenue or the analysis underlying the mayor's revenue projections? But our budget office, council's budget office, is doing an economic impact analysis. I'm going to say not for a few weeks.
Where do you stand in the deal right now? If you came to a vote today, would you vote for it or against it?
I think the deal can be made much better for taxpayers, which is what I've been saying all along. There's over $1 billion in direct subsidy, which is substantially more than what was initially announced. Not included in those figures are, for instance, the cost, which will be in the tens of millions of dollars for either a metro station expansion or a new metro station. Also not included in those costs are the cost of the debt service, since we'll be borrowing for this. But then in addition, there are as yet uncalculated benefits to the team. For instance, foregone taxes, free land, and the profit return for development of the 2 non-stadium parcels.
So you're a no as of today?
I carefully did not answer that question and said that the deal can be made better.
Okay, so you're not answering whether or not.
Well, I would not put it before the council today. It would not be fair to taxpayers. And my sense is that if the question to residents was, do you support a stadium or not? I think it's a majority, but a bare majority that supports a stadium. If the question was put more correctly as, do you favor a better deal? I think you would find much, much more support. That's what people want, is a better deal. Are you good for the moment? I've been ignoring Dorothy. Dorothy?
I want to have follow-up questions related to the bill. One is, when we go back to the open meeting bill that's on the agenda. Are you aware that a Republican senator has already introduced
Yes.
a measure, and that does not dissuade you from reconsidering your move?
Correct.
Mr.
I think it was Mike Lee.
Mike Lee, yes. Regarding another matter that's on the agenda for tomorrow, a review of agency action clarification amendment act. Can you detail why you think this needs to be approved by the council at this point in time, since the Supreme Court decision overturning the Chevron precedent, which dated back to 1984, was just adopted last year, and another number of states and jurisdictions are still trying to sort it out themselves and figure out what it all means and how they should go forward. Why do you think it's important for the district to act at this point in time?
To act proactively on the issue?
So on tomorrow's agenda, you have 2 measures which in essence might be closing the door on the district's reputation and citizens' concern about an open and transparent government. One, the agency, the review of agency action would make it more difficult to appeal government decisions to the Court of Appeal. And the second one is the Open Meetings Act. And you have no concerns about either of those in terms of citizens'
Well, I
concern?
completely disagree. Completely disagree with your characterization of the clarification of agency actions. I think what the Supreme Court did last year was actually a move toward, I hesitate to use the phrase, judicial activism. So rather than an agency which has to go through a rulemaking process, interpreting a statute to apply it, instead what we're going to do is rely on an unelected individual judge, and it may be a judge in one jurisdiction that decides to interpret the statute one way, and a judge in another jurisdiction who decides to interpret it a different way, and that's to interpret a statute rather than to have an agency go through a rulemaking process, which is a much more deliberative, thoughtful, and evidence-based process. I completely disagree that that would limit citizens' ability to file suits, because there's nothing about the bill that limits a citizen's ability to file a suit. It only has to do with whether the court will give some deference to the agency. And let me be clear, deference doesn't mean it does whatever the agency wants, because it can look at whether there's judicial error, actually not judicial, whether there's error in the interpretation. They can also look at whether it's reasonable. It just means that they give some deference to it. And to eliminate that deference rule, which has been the case law for 40 years, is to say, well, it's just open season for the judges, however the judges are. Today it's conservative judges, tomorrow it could be liberal judges. That's not a better system, but it absolutely does not foreclose the ability of citizens to file appeals. That is just wrong, 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 Dorothy.
If I could reference section, 2C of the bill, it's in the it states, in fact, in reviewing an order or decision of the mayor or any agency in any court or administrative proceeding, including but not limited to proceedings under subsection A of this section, the reviewing tribunal shall defer to the mayor or agency's reasonable interpretation of a statute or regulation it administers, provided that the interpretation is not plainly wrong. How do you define plainly wrong? It's not defined anywhere in the bill.
That's
And
been,
indeed, the request for review that you asked of the,
Dorothy, you need to go to law school. So that's been the case law for 40 years.
well, what I'm suggesting, Mr. Chairman, is that when you read a statute, as the court will read the statute, you need to understand what the statute and the meaning was of the statute. Having a phrase in there that the court will defer to the agency and to the mayor unless it is plainly wrong. Who determines what is plainly wrong?
Well, gosh, that would be the court,
Have you
which
been-
is sort of the process now.
Have you been pressured by the DC Court of Appeals to adopt this?
No?
That's not what the staff in the Office of the Attorney General said.
Really?
Yes.
I haven't talked to anybody from the Court of
You had them
Appeals.
testify before your committee.
I don't think they did testify.
Well, I spoke to them after your your hearing.
I don't recall the Court of Appeals? Dorothy, go look at the hearing record. The Court of Appeals did not testify,
I
and
didn't say the Court of Appeals.
yes, you did.
No, excuse me. I said that the Solicitor General, the Office of the Attorney General.
Yeah, they testified.
Yes, and they indicated that they were being pressured to get the council to adopt this legislation.
Okay, that's not the same as me feeling pressure, which was your question.
They clearly testified
Let me
to that.
see if there's anyone else. Martin?
Sorry. First off, I'm totally listening to a podcast of you going on Supreme Court decisions. It's fascinating. Back to RFK. When you talk to the team or talking to the city, you ask if they've done any assessment of the value of the land itself. Because I know usually when the federal government disposes of land, if they sell it or they give it away, they do go through a fair market value process, kind of determine what the land should be worth. But they didn't do it this time just because they didn't give away the land and they just re-engineer a lease. And the city then had told me they haven't done anything.
Yeah, I think sooner or later we're going to be looking at that. I just don't remember whether that was something we asked of the team.
Do you also want your consultant to look into that to kind of give you a sense of?
I think so.
That it would be worth it, how much you could ask essentially give the team.
Well, I think one of the issues is, and I noted this in my newsletter, which you all should be reading, that come on, you can go to my website and link to it. The Nationals pay about $6 million a year in rent, and Monumental pays rent, I think it's $2 or $3 million a year, and there's no rent here. So that's one of the issues we'll be looking at.
Jail question. So you've mentioned a few times that there have been a number of P3 proposals over the years.
Yes.
Something to come on, one more recently. Can you say who those developers were who were interested?
The short answer is no, and the longer answer is I don't know other than one, and I don't actually know the name of the applicant.
Can you characterize, was it a local company? Was it a big, large-scale developer?
My understanding is it's a large local company. I wouldn't call them a developer, that's my recollection.
And in researching this, to see if this has been done elsewhere, it seems my initial research is no. Typically, when there's a public-private jail partnership, it's usually just the jail develops and then operates the jail.
Yeah, something like was done in the 90s. No, I would not support that, and I don't think that's what this is.
Sure. I'm not suggesting it is this. But it has this model been used specifically before with jails, with
Elsewhere, I don't know. Here, no, because we only have 2 jail buildings.
That's all.
Bill Rice.
About the DC archives at UDC, as you know, the mayor canceled it in favor of a public, smaller, some kind of facility at some school and storage facility and so forth. The principal reason, as we understand it, is because the costs of putting the building that had been planned at UDC had ballooned, and instead,
That sounds like the jail argument.
exactly.
Yeah, no, well, I think that we had not really looked at what the costs were and whether those costs actually could be reduced. Sometimes DGS goes out and gets a little bit more fancy than it needs to be with a building. I'm not aware that I have heard, and I have heard third-hand hearsay. I have heard hearsay that the cost was going to be substantially more than roughly $100 million that was budgeted, and but that had not been analyzed, and I don't think that that was necessarily the way it needs to end up. So I don't buy the cost argument. I think the cost could be reduced, and from what we were hearing, and that this should be looked at more carefully. But I would add, the city has already spent boatloads of money on planning for this. My understanding is that plans have been paid for and drawn up. I heard last week at the UDC hearing that permits had been applied for. All of that costs money, and probably millions of dollars, and all that would be thrown out the window with this proposal. So to pick a number, because this is what I've heard, and I don't know that it's accurate at all, to say that the archives was going to cost $150 million is unvetted, untested, and to say that the jettisoning the whole proposal is more economically beneficial to the city when we've already spent a lot of money going down this road that for several years was touted as the best approach is wasteful.
What about the context of spending more money to turn it into a student dorm? Which is what the mayor's proposing.
I think the university, I've asked the university for a couple of years to do a better job at making the case for student housing. But we still need a archives. As you know, Bill, the archives right now is in a garage facility on Naylor Court, completely unacceptable. And actually a lot of the district's documents are stored for rent at a federal archives facility in Suitland. So the current situation is unacceptable. And for several years, a solution was not just proposed but bragged about that would benefit UDC as well as an improved archives, and that's being jettisoned. And I think that's a problem. But let me just say, this is all part of the budget process, and I'm giving you preliminary reactions, and we'll see how this plays out over the next 4 weeks, 5 weeks. Yes.
I just want to circle back to the rental act. Got my bearings now. The particular provision here was watered down the Community Development Act of 1975. So my understanding was that that legislation put it in the hands of the council to decide whether to take public land and give it to a private developer, but the provision of the rental act that passed would give the mayor unilateral power to do that. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that particular provision. What are the implications of that the mayor would be able to?
Is that in the BSA or in the Rental Act?
That's in the rental act.
Okay, I've not focused on that, so I would do you a disservice if I were to comment.
It's unfortunate. really do want to.
It's the most important question of the moment, but I am not going to be able to give you a good answer.
I'll second that.
Jenny, did you have your hand up again?
I did, I forgot to ask about the healthcare alliance program. Do you think they're going to sustain to phase out bills from that program with ESA?
I'm going to rely on the health committee in terms of looking at that and whether it makes sense. Preliminarily, my sense is that that actually may be more economically prudent. I don't like the way I just said that, because it's not about just saving money, but my understanding is that there are a lot of folks, there are a number of folks on the Alliance program who don't actually live here, but we're paying for them because of the way it's structured. And this would shift the payments to fee-for-service, which ordinarily might not be the most economical approach, but actually we would only be paying for residents instead of the managed care contract, which apparently pays for non-residents.
That's one change, but another would just phase people over the age of 21 out of the program eventually. Is that, you know, what you're saying?
Well, I would need to understand it better, and again, I'm going to look to the health committee. I have very much been in supportive of access to health care. I'll say universal access to health care in the district. And if this works against us, then I would not like that.
And I guess just like my last question, the mayor explained this as sort of on the agenda, and just the policy institute is called the budget, you know, in all the agenda for the cuts. You know, programs like TNF and other things that people use, like the forms people mostly rely on. Do you have a general take on the budget and sort of how, I guess, how it serves a balance between investing in business and protecting people who have a residency?
I think the council is going to make adjustments to the budget to try to deal with the cuts to human service programs, and we should. I don't think it is fair to try to characterize the budget as either or, either pro-growth or anti-resident or anti-poor people. I think that's unfair. I do think that the rhetoric about it being pro-growth has a hollow ring to it. There are a couple of tax increases in the budget that fall on businesses. That's generally not about growth. We're going to make businesses pay more to be here. I'm trying to go through my mind. We've only had the budget for, what, 3-4 days? But I think there were some choices that could have been made differently that would support businesses, do more to support businesses. Alex?
Do you have a sense yet for what the military parade 2 weekends from now is going to cost the city in terms of repairing roads, securing it, police, and how you deal with that in the budget?
Well, I've heard some numbers tossed around. The mayor has not briefed me, but my understanding is it's going to be in the over 10 million. I actually think it's going to be more than that. What was your question besides cost?
No, I mean just simply like how they would cope with it. I assume this would be in the supplemental budget. You would have to deal with this as part of what MPD overtime costs mostly.
Well, what should happen is that the Emergency Planning and Security Fund, which is a fund that basically reimburses the city, but is funded by the federal government, should be paid to cover the cost. And so that comes from Congress, not from the city. And that is an issue that is or will be on our plate. As you know, part of our budget process is we adopt legislation called the Federal Portion Budget Request Act. And this will very definitely be in that legislation, reimbursing us for that. So I'm not quite sure if I answered your question succinctly. There is a cost. The cost is concerning. The cost should be reimbursed by the federal government. That has to be worked out. If there are no other questions, Sam, you'll be the last one.
All right, so this is related to the budget timeline. Earlier, if I recall correctly, you did apologize to residents and advocates just for sort of, I guess, the delay in the process. What kind of alternatives could you have explored in terms of just providing more time for more hearings and just more opportunities for residents to come in? Like, what discussions were around the right? Or is there still ample opportunity for residents to weigh in on the budget?
Well, residents will have, our first vote is going to be roughly 6 weeks from when it was introduced. So residents have roughly 6 weeks to look at and weigh in on the budget. The challenge is that the first hearing was, I believe, scheduled for last Wednesday. And if I'm wrong, then it was Thursday. The books didn't come out until Friday, although the budget chapters were available online on Tuesday. But it's just really hard for the public to follow. It's also hard because we've had 3 schedules. What we're working with now is the 3rd schedule we came up with. So, Sam, I told you that you could testify on OSSI on April 3rd, and then it becomes May 3rd, and now it's June 3rd. You know, that's just not fair to the public. Not a lot of choices. The choices were taken away from us by delivering the budget 2 months late.
And how did it affect deliberation on just legislation in general?
In the last 3 or 4 meetings, I believe 1 bill has come out of a committee other than the committee of the whole. So all legislative work was substantially slowed during April and May, because that's when we were going to be working on the budget. No legislative work. The legislative work was going to take place in June and July. Well, now we're dealing with the budget. So I just did a re-referral of the bottle bill, giving the Committee on Business and Economic Development instead of July 14th, November 14th, because they haven't had time to act on it. So it's just an example of how the delay in the budget has affected other legislating.
Last question, please bear with me. How would this affect recess? I know I heard something about.
Well, we're going to be meeting during recess on the budget.
So the recess will be short.
Yes. Thank you all very much.
This one was particularly.
We should have buy you a camera.
What did Bill do?
Okay, I'll delete it. He took a picture of all the reporters when they were waiting. Jen didn't like how she.
You caused some trouble.
Here's